This is absolutely wild. 2 years ago, this type of deal seemed impossible. In the days of the Wilpons owning the New York Mets, the team was noted for being cheap and rarely paid the premium price for top-level talent. Many times, Fred and Jeff would either go bargain bin hunting or splurge on free agent talents that weren't quite worth it. There was a lingering stink on the Mets that a major market team in the biggest city in the USA couldn't attract the best free agents. All the meanwhile, their neighbors up in the Bronx would go all out for guys like CC Sabathia, while the Mets settled for guys like Jason Bay. It was torturous at times, especially knowing the payroll possibilities were there, and yet the team still managed to muck it all up year after year. But fast forward 2 years and a change in ownership that was long overdue has finally given the Mets a new identity. One that may still be flawed, but is markedly different from the Wilpon era. It led to Max Scherzer, a top 3 pitcher in baseball, joining the New York Mets. And there is certainly more to come. As a Mets fan, this new day is so refreshing. My big market team finally acted like a big market team. So let's get into just why Steve Cohen's Scherzer deal is just the latest display of a major change that's at hand. Real quick, before we start, make sure to click on that red button to subscribe if you haven't already, and ring the bell to stay notified for future videos. And while you're here, feel free to check out my last video I made on the free agency of the shortstop. And without further ado, let's get started. It may seem like a decade ago, but back in 2020, the Mets were the most frustrating team in baseball. They had one of the best offenses in the league, leading all teams in batting average and OPS+. They had reigning Rookie of the Year Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Michael Conforto, Brandon Nimmo, Dom Smith, and J.D. Davis that all made for an exciting young hitting core. On the pitching side, they also had Jacob deGrom, the best pitcher in the league, still at the peak of his powers. On paper, this team should have been in contention for at least a wildcard spot, if not the NL East. But around those bright spots of the team, there were a lot of rotten parts that held this team back from greatness. First off, their potent offense that was top 10 in many metrics was also the worst in the majors, with leaving runners on base and grouting into double plays. Furthermore, their rotation outside of DeGoat consisted of a rookie David Peterson, a struggling Steven Matz, and 2 bargain bin signings of Rick Porcello and Michael Wacha, courtesy of a general managing masterclass by the great Brodie Van Wagenen. Couple all that with a putrid bullpen and put it all together, and the Mets were 26-34 and were tied for last in the division. It was a pathetic display for the team, but it was nothing new for Mets fans like myself who grew up under the Mets of the Wilpons. In what would be the last year of the dismal duo of Brodie and the Wilpons, the 2020 Mets were a perfect encapsulation of everything that was wrong with the team. You had albatross contracts for older players like Robinson Cano, thanks Brodie. You had terrible trades that set the team years back, like the one for Edwin Diaz and Robinson Cano, thanks again Brodie. And you also had deals for patchwork pitchers that didn't really solve any issues, such as the ones for Wacha and Porcello. It was an ugly assorted mess of a roster that, despite its few bright spots, could never get anything going when it mattered most. I mean, you even had instant controversy before the season started with the manager when Carlos Beltran was hired, and then less than a month later he was let go and replaced by a rookie manager in Luis Rojas. And then a week into the season, Cespedes went AWOL for no reason and got cut from the team, and Lowell Mets was beginning to pick up steam once more. Of all the Wilpon-led teams, this one felt the most Metsiest of all. So after almost 2 decades of poor ownership by Fred and his meddling son, something had to change. Thankfully, a global pandemic that affected almost every owner's pockets forced their hand, and change would soon come. Enter Steve Cohen, a billionaire Mets fan who was already a minority owner of the team. The former hedge fund manager and owner of an extremely valuable and eclectic art collection seemed like the perfect fit to replace the Wilpons. So after he bought out their remaining stake, the only fingerprint left on the team was the Wilpon stake in SNY. Sweet bliss. The hope was that by replacing notoriously cheap owners with the man who had $14 billion in the bank would solve a lot of the Mets' woes. Gone were the days of bargain bin hunting and not paying top price for the best talent. With the richest owner in baseball, the possibilities were endless. And Uncle Steve made an early statement in this regard before his first season of ownership even started. He wanted a big fish right away and got aggressive for it. So he traded for Francisco Lindor, a perennial 2-way all-star in his prime, and didn't have to give up much in return. After a few months of back and forth about whether to sign him before this season or not, Cohen opened up the checkbook just before the deadline and handed Mr. Smile a 10-year, $141 million contract extension. That was the early tone setter for Steve and his new team. It was the most money for a shortstop ever and set the market for the current shortstop free agency class, something I'm sure Corey Seager and Carlos Correa have already thanked Lindor and Cohen for. With that deal, Steve stated loud and clear that the Mets would not be afraid to outpay anyone else if it meant landing a premium talent. However, the honeymoon phase only lasted for so long. Even though the Mets were leading the division for a better part of the year, new acquisition Lindor struggled mightily in his first season in Queens. And as the Mets went through their usual August implosion, things were starting to feel like the old normal. I made a video on the 2021 Mets being all smoke and mirrors while their downfall was happening, and noted how Cohen had a vision to make the Mets the Dodgers of the East Coast. I said then that it would have to happen over the course of several years, and that's why it didn't surprise me how bad the Mets were in his first year of ownership. I mean, the team was a mess on and off the field. From their second GM of the year getting caught in a DUI after the first one had to resign due to sexual assault accusations, to the fact that this team spent 103 days in first and still had a losing record, the first year of Steve Cohen's Mets was a mess. So after the 2021 season, people rightfully began to ask questions of this team that was once again in need of a structural overhaul. Who would they hire as GM? How would they fix the terrible offense? Who will manage the team? Why does God hate the Mets? All of these problems will fall on the back of Steve Cohen, and it would truly test what type of owner he really was. Year 1 you can excuse as a sort of gap year between the old regime and the new one. You can't build Rome in a day, so why would you expect the Mets to be rebuilt in a year? Like I said, sometimes it takes a few to change the direction of a franchise and to set a new tone in the clubhouse. But Steve knew that the biggest advantage that he had over everyone else, his nearly unlimited cash reservoir, would have to be what he built his team on. Of course, you can't simply buy a championship, but having the most money to buy with certainly doesn't hurt. So during this offseason, the Mets were once again in the hunt for prime talent. This time around though, they didn't have to trade for their guy. Instead, they went for some of the best guys at their position in free agency and paid them heftily. Things started with a bang with the signing of Starling Marte to a 4-year, $78 million deal. A former All-Star and Gold Glover, the lifetime .289 hitter was considered the premier center fielder on the market. And although it's odd that someone as good as him has bounced around 4 teams in 3 years, he's still one of the most productive hitters and better defenders in the league. Then after that great signing, the Mets signed outfielder Mark Canha to a 2-year deal worth $26.5 million with a 3rd-year option, and also signed utility infielder Eduardo Escobar to a 2-year $20 million contract. Both moves are solid and smart depth signings, as Canha can play either corner outfielder spot while providing a big bat, and Escobar can play wherever the Mets have a hole in the infield. All 3 signings will provide much needed veteran leadership, and more importantly will help with runners on. Last year, Escobar hit .280 with runners in scoring position, Canha hit .289, and Marte hit .327. This will certainly help a Mets team that's been allergic to clutch hits over the last 2 years, and will certainly improve upon a team that had a .697 OPS as a team in 2021. While those 3 signings were key moves that helped fill several needs for the team, the next one was the biggest and most unexpected. After a week of speculation that I myself couldn't come to believe, New York signed 3-time Cy Young Award winner and arguably the best pitcher in baseball over the last decade, Mad Max Scherzer. And I say arguably the best pitcher over the last 10 years since his new teammate DeGrom might have something to say about that. Okay, so before I get all giddy about the Scherzer signing and what that means, we have to acknowledge there are some big risks. As he signed to a 3-year, $130 million contract at age 37, there is a high possibility that age finally catches up to him. Max did have to deal with a dead arm in this past postseason, which was unfortunate, but it may speak to a larger issue of long-term wear and tear on his arm. But even with that, and the fact that his $43 million per year is the highest ever for a player, let's assume he does stay healthy for those 3 seasons. If he does, we will probably get to see the greatest 1-2 start to a rotation ever in DeGrom and Scherzer. Those 2 alone have combined for 5 Cy Youngs and over 4,500 punchouts. So if he and Scherzer can both manage to avoid the IL, then there's no equivalent in Mets history for what they could do. Even in '69 when you had Seaver and Kuzman, or '86 with Darling and Ojeda, or even 2015 with DeGrom, Harvey, and Syndergaard, you didn't have a top 2 with that level of talent. It's not an exaggeration to say that for a single season they could be the best pitching duo of all time. But what the Scherzer signing, along with the additions of Canha, Marte, and Escobar really show are that Cohen's Mets won't rest on their laurels. He saw how thin the rotation could be after DeGrom and how the hitters couldn't produce in the clutch. So he went out and got 3 clutch hitters and a top 3 pitcher to complement DeGrom, all the while paying major money to do so. Of course, sometimes having all the money in the world can be a curse for a team. I mean, Lindor is coming into that first year of his 10-year mega extension after having the worst offensive year of his career in 2021. And with Scherzer on tap, between those 2, they'll take up 34% of a payroll that is already the league's highest and could surpass $300 million easily. This will make it harder to sign other high-priced free agents in the coming years unless they want to incur the wrath of the luxury tax. Yet Cohen has already stated that he would do so if it meant giving his team a World Series contender. Instead, the Mets will have to work between the lines to fill the majority of their roster. In the past, that would have meant more cheap purchases that fill temporary voids for lasting problems. Now though, they'll have to be more shrewd, not trading away top prospects and signing utility guys like Escobar to reasonable deals. Nonetheless, gone are the days that the Mets would be afraid to even go after Scherzer and Marte, the two top free agents at their position. Cohen has made it known that his team won't miss out on talent because they were outbid. And for someone trying to change the identity and culture of an organization, he's sticking to what he knows best. As for that shift in perception, Scherzer along with Lindor both stated their goal to bring a new energy to the clubhouse. Having good veteran voices around a team goes a long way, and now the Mets have two of the more unique and respected ones in the business. And although they have to pay a significant amount for them, maybe that's the true price of turning around a franchise. Obviously, the Mets still have holes as a team. The bullpen is still suspect, and the rotation is murky after DeGrom and Scherzer, especially with Stroman walking. But in spite of all that, Cohen has made a handful of aggressive and significant moves for the team. His success as an owner will be judged upon how he's able to manage the short-term and long-term success of the Mets. As of now, the short-term looks as bright as ever, and the long-term hasn't been compromised yet to do so. Most importantly though, by signing Scherzer, Steve Cohen has established an important new identity for the Mets. We will pay great money for the best players out there. That simple mantra can go a long way in reshaping the narrative around a team for players, agents, and opposing teams. It's only a start, and there's much more work to be done, but hey, at least it's already better than what we had during our darker days.